Thank you very much, and I would really like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today. It is a big honor for me to speak and tell about some of the issues that we are dealing with. And thank you also for all these nice words which I have heard about the work of UNODC. It is not that often that we are praised in this way, so I'm very happy for that. Let me start this brief presentation by two quotes which I would like to read to you. The first one, actually you can also see it here, is discussing the motivation and money. The motive underlying the traffic in women has always been money. It is a business out of which large profits can be made, and like other businesses, it is governed by the law and supply and of supply and demand. And I think this is what we have already discussed it, the issue of money and how profits is motivating the trafficking persons very much. The other quote is on solutions and responses, and it has been said that it is obvious that there is no single or simple means of suppressing the traffic. An exact knowledge of the facts, active supervision, and the application of suitable laws and measures of protection are all necessary elements in the campaign against the traffic. And I think also these are the issues which we have discussed today. So this is all very modern, but actually these quotes are written and published 90 years ago by the League of Nations in the report of the special body of experts on traffic in women and children. So we are discussing the same issues now after 90 years, even with the same concepts, and I think that this event here could be a very useful or give us a very useful possibility to review. Did something happen during these 90 years? Are we still just discussing these same issues without any new solutions? I think we had some solutions, but I think it is quite interesting that we are speaking about the topic which has been discussed for a long time ago, or for a long time. So moving to the actual topic of my today's presentation, I'm going to present some of the global figures which we came out with our global report on trafficking in persons, which was published in November 2014. This report is based on the information which we mainly received from the member states. So there are obvious limitations and, as was mentioned, frustrations also with this information. However, keeping in mind the limitations, it can give us some information on trafficking in persons. The biggest limitation is that it is actually describing only the situation which is connected to known cases of trafficking in persons. So those cases which became to the knowledge of our authorities or some other bodies. We do know that there is a big hidden part of trafficking in persons, and we know very little about it. There are some estimations of its size, but still we have to admit that there is not very much knowledge on that hidden part of trafficking in persons. So keep this in mind, that actually the figures which I'm going to present, they are not always a reflection of reality. What I am very confident to say is that trafficking in persons happens everywhere. We found victims with 152 citizenships who were identified in 124 countries across the globe. We also identified at least 510 trafficking in persons flows, and one flow is defined so that at least 5 persons had the same origin and destination. So I think we can, with this, we can show that trafficking in persons happens nearly in all countries in the world. Also, it has an impact on millions of people, and these are the ILO figures, which has been actually referred to several times already. Around 21 million people are estimated to be in forced labor at any given time, and from these people, around 150 billion US dollars are made as profits. However, the trafficking in persons is very much, in a way, a local business. Even though most of the trafficking in persons victims, they are trafficked transnationally, which means that there is usually at least one border crossing involved. Most of the trafficking in persons happens within sub-regions, and 34% of the trafficking happens within the borders of one country. Only around quarter of the detected trafficking cases are so-called trans-regional, which are involving long-distance trafficking between different continents. So we actually came to the conclusion that big part of trafficking persons is quite local. Also, when we look at the nationality of those persons who have been convicted, we actually found out that 64% of the convicted traffickers were nationals of that country where they were convicted. So this also speaks on behalf of the like a local nature of trafficking in persons. Sexual exploitation continues to be the biggest form of trafficking which has been detected. However, currently 40% of the detected cases are on forced labor. And also during the recent years, there is a clear increase of forced labor cases. This doesn't necessarily mean that there are more and more forced labor cases. We actually do think that this reflects more the awareness, so that there is more awareness of forced labor as a form of trafficking, and actually also the law enforcement and other authors, they can look more carefully to those businesses and practices which might include forced labor, so it is actually more found. Then I'm going to speak about some factors increasing the vulnerability to trafficking in persons. First of them is age. We have had constantly a finding that the share of child victims among all trafficking victims is increasing. If we look at the picture or trend between 2004 and 2011, we can see that the trafficking or share of girl victims has increased from 10% to 21%, and the same has happened with boys, even though with a bit lower levels. The share of boys who have been victimized in trafficking persons has increased from 3% to 12% between 2004 and 2011. However, there are extremely significant variations and differences between different regions. If you look at the sub-Saharan Africa, which is on top of this figure, you can see that 70% of detected victims were children under the age of 18. If you look at the Middle East and North Africa region, only 5% were children, and in Eastern Europe and Central Asia, only 8% were children. So there are really, really big differences, and we don't exactly know, or we have some ideas why this is happening, but we actually should see much more carefully what are the reasons behind these big differences. The other issue which is clearly having a link with trafficking persons is gender. The big majority of identified and detected victims are still women and girls. 70% of all detected victims are women and girls, and then we have also adult men and boys who have been detected, but they are much lower numbers. There are also, in this case, regional differences, And when you look at the regions in East Asia and Pacific, in Eastern Europe and Central Asia and South Asia, less than 20% or 20% or less of trafficking victims are men. And then when you go to African regions, there are around 40% of trafficking victims are men. So there are also differences in this case, and actually also here we would need to look more carefully what are the reasons for these differences. As mentioned already, if we take this 40% of the forced labor detections, we can see then that 35% of the detected victims who have been exploited in forced labor, they are women. When we look at the sexual exploitation figures, nearly all of the trafficking victims there are women. So the conclusion is that while men are actually mainly trafficked for forced labor, women are trafficked for both sexual exploitation and forced labor. Also, if we look at the traffickers and who have been prosecuted and convicted, we can see a big involvement of women. Around 30% of those who have been prosecuted and convicted are women in trafficking in persons cases. In other crimes, usually this percentage is between 10 and 15%. So there is a much more involvement of women in trafficking in persons crimes. But there might be several reasons for that. One reason might be that because there is actually some research which is indicating that when there are organized crime groups or criminal groups who are trafficking persons, and if women are involved in these groups, they are usually given those jobs which are most visible, so that there is a bigger danger for them to be detected. Also, if you think about the women's role, usually their role, specifically with sexual exploitation, is to recruit victims. And this is of course very visible for the victims. And if we think about the investigation methods which are currently used, most of the investigation, or very big part of the investigation, is based on victims' testimony, and the victims are of course announcing those that they see, and usually they see mostly the traffickers who are the recruiters. So in this case also the women actually are overrepresented in the prosecution and conviction figures. And unfortunately I have also heard that in some regions, specifically in Central Asia, where the figures are extremely high on prosecuted and convicted female traffickers, that in some cases actually women are forced to be recruiters. So actually those women who are convicted, they are in reality the victims who have been forced to be traffickers. So this is also an area that we would need more research to be done. Economic disparity is connected to trafficking in persons, and this figure, even though it's probably difficult to see, shows that there are basically three main hubs for trans-regional trafficking. One is one is the Middle East, one is Western Europe, and one is North America. So these are the more affluent regions in the world. And those countries who are sending people to these destinations, they actually locate usually in South America, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in different parts of Asia, and in Eastern Europe. So the trafficking flow is directing from poor areas to more affluent ones. We also looked at the GDP and actually the share of victims of trans-regional trafficking, and we actually could see a correlation between those, so that in more affluent countries we could find more bigger share of victims who are victims of trans-regional trafficking, and the origins for these victims are usually in the poor areas of the world. The presence of organized crime is also linked to trafficking persons, but the situation is not that simple. Because if we look at the cross-border trafficking, we can see that if there is a high prevalence of organized crime in the countries of origin, the victims from these countries can be found more in the destinations. However, this the presence of organized crime in origin countries has been seen to have an impact on trafficking in persons. However, if we look at the domestic trafficking, which is happening in the borders of one country, this kind of connection is not seen at all. Also, when you look at the organized crime involvement in trafficking in persons, we can see that it is different in different cases, and we have to appreciate that trafficking persons is not a homogeneous type of thing which is happening. There are different types of trafficking, and we try to build a typology according to the organization of trafficking. So we could have a small trafficking and small local operations where organized crime is not involved, and an example of that could be, for example, a couple, a husband is exploiting a wife, for example, in sexual exploitation. Then we have medium sub-regional operations which might have some links to organized crime, but not always. And then we have large transnational, trans-regional operations where there are big investments, there are big profits, there are also a large number of victims, and the operations are quite complicated. And usually in these cases we see the organized crime involvement clearly. Conflicts, it has been mentioned already, I think that conflicts, they do have an impact on trafficking in persons, and here are some findings which we had when we did our last report. For the first time, we actually could identify Syrian victims, which were very rarely identified previously, and they were identified in Middle East and Western European countries. We also had reported cases of children who have been recruited by armed groups in Central African Republic and also in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The same kind of phenomena is connected to disasters. However, we do not have currently any data on that, but it is one of the areas which should be looked at also. Then also weak criminal justice response has an impact, since the traffickers, they can continue their operations without anybody actually punishing them. And as mentioned already, there is a big role with the legislation. However, and we can see that after the Palermo, the United Nations Trafficking in Persons Protocol entered into force, it gave a big boost to the legislation. Before the protocol, there were less than 50% of countries who had any kind of legislation against trafficking persons, and currently we have only 5% of countries which do not have any type of legislation against trafficking persons. So there is a significant impact of the protocol to the legislation. Unfortunately, this impact didn't carry on to the convictions. And we have still around 40% of countries who didn't have any convictions or had less than 10 convictions during the previous years. So this is really quite a disappointing fact, and the situation has not really changed during the last 10 years. So there are also some discussions why this is happening, but it is clearly we can clearly see that the prosecution, that the legislation was not followed up by the convictions. If we also look at the efficiency of the criminal justice system, what they do with the criminal justice, with the trafficking persons cases, we take 100 persons who have been suspected of trafficking in persons. Only 24 of those are actually convicted. And this is also, compared to other crimes, this is not very very good result. So of course there are regional differences in that, but mainly the criminal justice system is not very efficient when dealing with trafficking in persons crimes. Then lastly, corruption has been mentioned several times, and it is clear that there is an impact on trafficking in persons at many levels and in many ways. The corruption facilitates human trafficking. It increases the profits of traffickers and public and private actors. It has an impact on the trafficking measures and investigations, and it also violates the victims' rights. There, as has been mentioned already several times, corruption is really something that should be really looked at very carefully. However, when I looked at we have with UNODC, we have a case law database on trafficking persons. We have more than 1,000 cases. And when we looked at these cases, there is only a handful of cases which actually even mentioned corruption. So this is totally ignored by the convictions. And also, if we look at the research which is existing today on corruption, then the links between corruption and trafficking persons, it's nearly non-existent. So we are speaking about the corruption and how important the corruption is, but the action is really not there. You can find, there is of course much more in our report, and you can find the findings from our webpage. We have now started to prepare our next report, which will come out in 2016. And the last thing which I would like to say is connected to the objectives of this event. I'm naturally being very much connected to the Sustainable Development Goals discussions, specifically when we have been dealing with the indicators, and there is a very, very hot discussion concerning the whole issue and the indicators. And I think your goal to try to get the trafficking persons as one of the goals is really heroic. There is a very big competition out there, but really, if our office and also me personally, if we can help you in any ways, we would be very, very happy to do that. Thank you.